Bonjour, bonjour, mes amis. It is wonderful to see you here this evening. We are going to be tossing things up a little bit tonight, which I'm looking forward to, and I hope you are as well. So, welcome to our audience. My name is Dr. Krista Kosterman, and I am the Chief Science Officer here at the DNA Company, responsible for a lot of our testing and our interpretation thereof. And tonight, I get to be a bit of a host of a reality game. What reality game, you all ask? So, typically, we sit in these webinars and we talk about kind of serious things. We talk about cardiovascular disease. Sometimes we're talking about hormones and BHRT, and sometimes we're talking about more serious things like mental health. Not a lot of room for play, but today we're going to be playing. We're going to be effectively guessing who's who based on their genes. So, audience, let me tell you where and how this game was inspired. But before I do that, I want to encourage you to play along a little bit. How can you play along, you ask? First of all, I need to know if you have your DNA 360. So please toss into the chat a one if you do. And as you're doing that, I would really encourage you to bring up your DNA 360. There's two different ways. Ooh, seeing a lot of ones. Thank you, audience. There's two different ways that you can play along. The first one is going to be going into your patient portal. And so this is where you would find all of your reports. The other way that you can play along is through the DNA Way app, because you'll also see all your reports, all your results there. So we'll also put into the chat, oh, so many reports. We're going to put into the chat how you can access that app, but you really do have a choice either through the portal or through the app. Either which way, what you want to do is you want to pull up your hormone report. So this is fitness report. And what we'll be focusing on tonight is the system summary. Okay. Oh, seeing all the ones. I'm glad that it's a bit of a family affair this evening, those with the report. And for those that don't have the report, don't worry about it. We're going to be going through how you can learn, especially about the way your body presents in the world off of your genes. What sorry, what is under the app? So we're going to put a link in the chat there, Barbara, or Barb, sorry, so that you can get access to the app and you can see these results. So, audience, let me tell you how I dug my own grave into a reality show this evening. So, it's people often say in clinical consults when I'm walking them through their genes, they're like, "Ooh, it's kind of like you have a crystal ball. You know, you're looking at my genes. You've never met me before, and yet you can tell me about my personality, and you can tell me about some of my stresses, and you can tell me about a lot of the way my body functions." And I made the mistake one day at work talking about this with the team. And I was saying, I can also do this with the way people look. I'm like, by and large, if I see someone, I can predict the genes behind their hormone profile. And audience, that was a little bit the knife in my grave, or I don't even know what that means, but that was a little bit the fait accompli in this game here, in that they're like, oh, well, we'll see that. We're going to put our pictures up and you're going to have to guess who's who. And so that's exactly what we're going to be doing tonight, audience. We're going to be looking at team members of the DNA company who have volunteered and given consent for some of their genes to be displayed with you. We're going to show those genes. I'm going to walk through their hormone profile. I'm going to say, based on this hormone profile, this is what I would expect the body morphology, the body presentation of that person to be. And then my team is going to put up a bunch of pictures on the screen of teammates, and they're going to make me guess, audience. So that's what we're in for. I really would encourage and want you to guess along with me. So please get ready. I'm looking forward to tonight. It's a little bit more of a fun, playful thing. And I think we're also looking at something that we don't often talk about, right? How do your hormones, namely your sex steroid hormones, influence the way your body presents in the world? Right. And so that's what we're going to be doing this evening. So, audience, I hope you're ready for it. For those that have their DNA 360, please again toss into the chat a one if you're ready, because I want to make sure as we go through these different profiles, you can see your own profile. And every once in a while, you can be like, ooh, that's me. And then see yourself within that profile. All right. I'm seeing all the ones. I love it. Okay, audience, here we go. So, Vanny or Jen, if one of you could please put up the first profile for me. There we go. Thank you, Jen. All right, audience, can everyone see that? Everyone can see that we're looking at a hormone profile here? All right, thanks, audience. So, this person's hormone profile is saying they are estrogen dominant. So, let's break down what so Lisa, just for the audience's reference, we're in the hormone and fitness section. To shortcut to it, you want to go into the system summary. Okay, and the system summary will talk about your specific hormone profile. And at some point tonight, we'll be touching on your hormone profile. So this person's hormone profile is estrogen dominant. Okay, so let's break down exactly what that means. The first word, estrogen, means that between the two sex steroid hormones, the options being estrogen and the other one being androgen or testosterone, this person is going to be more favored towards putting forward estrogens. Their body likes to make the estrogens compared to the androgens, right? So, right off the bat, this doesn't tell us if this person is male or female, right? Because both men and women produce estrogen, right? And if you're a man, estrogen will have a bit of a different morphology influence compared to a woman. And I'll walk us through both, okay? So, this person, we know their body likes to be making estrogen more so than androgens. We also know dominant. What is that telling us? Now, audience, this really speaks to how much hormone is your body inclined to be making. The difference is the two the spectrum really sits from balanced up to dominant. Balanced meaning your body is making just enough sex steroid hormone to have those sexual characteristics, right? So, sexual characteristics in women, we're talking about hips and breasts and buttock, right? In men, sexual characteristics are going to be more, we're thinking like Adam's apple, defined jaw, to a certain extent, ability to put on muscle mass, right? So, those with more of a balanced profile are people that are just producing enough to have all those characteristics compared to a dominant profile, which is making more than arguably is needed, which means they're going to have a bit more of a their sex features. So, again, the hips, the Adam's apple, whatever it might be, is going to be a little bit more exaggerated compared to someone with that more balanced profile. So, this profile, while it doesn't yet tell us man or woman, it does tell us that this person is more inclined to be creating their estrogens, right? And they are doing so in a very a strong way. They're really showing up and doing that. So, what is that going to shift if this person was male or female? Okay. If this is a female, right, we would expect, what does estrogen do in terms of body shape? We would expect that this woman would be very curvy, right? We would expect some generous hips, some generous buttocks, and some generous breast. Now, again, audience, there's a lot of different genes that influence this. So we're talking in generalities. But if this was a woman standing before me, I would expect them to be a little bit more curvy. Okay. Estrogen dominant profiles also mean that our metabolism may not be as high compared to other profiles, either a balanced profile or perhaps an androgen profile. So I would again expect, well, this doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to be overweight. What it does mean, you've seen that person who's like muscle bound at the beach at the gym, right? We would say they have a very lean physique, right? Because we can see that muscle, right? So with this less lean physique, it's not meaning overweight. It just means that there's a little bit more cushion before you're getting to some of that muscle. Okay, so if we're thinking woman, we're thinking much softer figure with curves. If we're seeing the same in a man, right? Because this is a little more estrogen forward, they're not necessarily going to be able to put on muscle as easily as a more androgen forward profile. So it's not to say they can't, but they're not necessarily going to be our muscle bound men walking around. They'll sit a little bit on that leaner side. Okay. Jen, if you want to advance the screen for me, please, let's look at a few other characteristics that this person has. Um, first for this one, and this one doesn't impact body morphology so much, but I want to give nod to it, estrogen toxicity, because this is on the minds, especially of women. This tends to be very impactful for women, especially in and around menopause and how they menstruate. But when we go down, we're going to see some other things that really influence how they might be presenting. So we look in terms of cystic acne, hair loss, and hirsutism, right? Hirsutism, in particular for women, is when they're presenting with characteristics you'd expect more within a man. So that would be facial hair. That's going to be some central adiposity, so close audience, things of that nature. So this profile with the estrogen dominant, because this person is more inclined to be pushing forward with their estrogens, we wouldn't expect any of these parameters. Again, audience, there's other things that go into this. This is a bit of a generality, but this is what is going to be influenced here. Okay. The one thing, the last element that we're looking at here is cellulite. Many genes go into this, but typically profiles who are estrogen dominant in particular struggle a little bit more with this because of that increased presence of estrogen. So a little bit of that dimpling, especially on thighs and buttock. Okay. So now, audience, here is where I'm supposed to guess, is this male or female? And then from there, I'm supposed to guess who it is. Audience, any guess? And let's be honest, this is a coin toss. Anyone want to guess if it's male or female? All right, I'm seeing some female guesses from the audience. And since those are the guesses I'm seeing, I'm going to go with the audience. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of female guesses. So I'm going to guess female for this person. Um, Jen or Vanny, did I get that right? Let's find out. Oh, nope. Definitely a male. Okay, audience. It's cool. We're batting zero here. That's fine. That's fine. So now I'm seeing pictures before me, and audience, isn't it wonderful that my company loves me so much? So here's the thing about body morphology and everything that we've just talked about. It doesn't really show up until you've hit puberty. And most of these men here in this photo, except for maybe one, haven't even hit puberty. So, audience, there's another element of Russian roulette here because remember, audience, I just talked about how estrogen influences figure, right? And how androgens influence figure. And all of these gentlemen, except for maybe the person on my right, I don't know what side of the screen it is for you, haven't really hit that point yet. So there's an element of I'm just going to guess in the dark. So I'm trying to think through at the company, who would I expect to have an estrogen dominant profile? Um, my guess is going to be Justin. All right. Vanny, Katie, did I get that? Oh, audience, here we go. All right. All right. So, audience, let me tell you why this is, right? Because we all know, I bet you there's a lot of people. Put up a hand, toss up a one into the chat if you're a little bit surprised by this. Because if you follow along with us, if you know the most infamous Justin Harris, we all know he's very muscle bound, right? Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of people surprised. We all know he's very muscle bound. He works out, and we associate him a little bit more with what I would imagine most people are thinking is a bit more of an androgen dominant profile. But audience, this is what I know. Justin works so very hard at his fitness. And there's an element of that having to compensate for the fact that genetically speaking, oh, Justin is loved by our audience. I love it. Genetically speaking, he has to balance that his body naturally favors a little bit more of that estrogen tendency. So, audience, hear this, and I think this is really important to hear. Your hormone profile doesn't dictate how exactly you're going to show up in the world, but it does dictate how much harder you're going to have to work if you want it to be different. Justin works really hard for his muscle because there's an element of it goes against his genes and his efforts pay off. Okay. I think that's important. I want you to hear that as we go through these profiles. It does give us the big brush strokes, but you are able to balance that. Yep. Oh my gosh, Justin's getting so much love in the chat. Someone needs to record that and make sure Justin knows how adored he is by our audience. All right, audience. So I think we're going to move on to our next profile. And I hope you guys are all enjoying this. And for our estrogen dominant people out there, you heard a little bit of yourself as we were going through. All right. Vanny, Jen, would you mind putting up the next profile for us? Thank you. Oh, guys, look, we have another estrogen dominant. Okay, perfect. So, as we had talked about last time, you know, this profile is going to have a little bit more of that soft presentation, both in men and women. If it's a woman, very much some of the soft curves there, right? We're also, if you want to scroll down a little bit, please. Thank you. Yeah. So, um, for men, I think one thing that we didn't really talk about in the last time, if you're an estrogen dominant profile, there is a greater risk of something called gynecomastia, which is a very fancy way of saying male breast tissue. Why is that? Again, because the body leans a little bit more towards the estrogen side of things. And when that is not being properly balanced, meaning it's not being properly cleared out, and we look at how that can be cleared, or if you are ingesting, right, a lot of endocrine disrupting things, guys, unfortunately, think through plastics and other things like that, this can further encourage that sort of tissue growth. Okay. So for males, right, with an estrogen dominant, it's not fait accompli. It's not meaning you will absolutely get that, but there's a bit of a higher risk for that. Okay. If we want to scroll down a little bit to the next page. Yeah, and I think we've been through most of this insofar as there's an average risk for cystic acne, for hair loss, for hirsutism, and a bit of an increased risk for cellulite. That cellulite risk is not really something we see in males. It's a little more specific to the fat tissues of females. All right, audience, who do we want to guess? Or actually, I'll take that a step back. Do we want to guess male or female for this next person? My money is going to be on female for no other reason than the last person was a male. Yep, yep. Audience is kind of right there with me. All right. Okay, okay. Here we go again. Audience, giving me all the childhood photos, just abandoning their chief science officer out here, asking her to guess who's who. All right, here we go. Okay, audience. So, my very Russian roulette guess is going to be the girl with the dog, who I know is one of our clinicians, Jessica. That is my arbitrary guess. Am I right, Jen or Vanny? Ah, okay. Nope. Audience, any guesses as to if it's window 2 or window 3? Do you want to put those pictures back up for us? That was your guess too, Kimberly? Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. All right. My guess is going to be the little girl in the superhero costume with the circle around her. I believe that is the most notorious Dr. Steady Hardcastle. That's my guess. Am I right? Yeah, there we go, guys. Here we go. So, our most wonderful Dr. Tracy Steady Hardcastle. Thank you, audience. Oh, actually, someone in the audience guessed that too. So, thank you, everyone, for helping me out. So, Dr. Steady Hardcastle is someone that presents with, interestingly, that soft, that estrogen dominant profile, insofar as she got some hips, she got a little bit of booty there. But audience, remember this, she also speaks to the spectrum. She is also based on diet and lifestyle. She lives in a way that keeps her relatively lean. So she's not necessarily that voluptuous picture that I painted before. Again, because we talk through, while genes will absolutely sketch this out, it is not 100% because there's a lot of diet and lifestyle intervention that can be done. So, audience, this is another example of someone who is estrogen dominant. All right, Dr. Steady, thank you for volunteering. Thank you for tossing a childhood picture up there. I appreciate you. All right, audience, I think we're going to move on to another profile. Guys, as we continue this, I'm seeing questions come in and I love it. Please make sure that you continue to put questions into the chat box at the side. I'll make sure I'll get to those at the end. Just know that because I'm focusing on some of the screen work before me, I'm not necessarily going to see the questions until the end. All right. All right, audience, we're looking at a co-dominant profile. And everyone's now saying, well, what exactly does that mean? Because we've only been talking about estrogens and androgens. The co means your body is a bit of an equal opportunist. You're actually happy to go down both pathways, right? There's two genes that we look at to determine are you happy to go with estrogens? That's CYP19A1, an aromatase. The other one is SRD5A2, and that's our 5 alpha reductase. So that one is going to be pushing, that 5 alpha is going to be pushing more towards testosterones, active testosterones, DHT in particular. The other one, the aromatase, is more pushing towards estrogens. If you're a co profile or a balanced profile, you're very happy to do both. Okay. And dominant, again, remember we learned that dominant means you're someone that's not just producing enough to have those hormones to hit puberty and have all those sex features. You're given a little bit extra. You go an extra to the table. Okay. So that means, again, so I would expect this person to have quite marked sex characteristics. Now, let us talk about what exactly that looks like. In women, I once heard this described. This is or can be one of the best, most ideal profiles in terms of body morphology. Why is that? We have our estrogens in order to give those beautiful feminine curves, but then we also have our androgens in order to put on some of that lean muscle mass and to keep the figure a little bit lean. Audience, I want to acknowledge I'm really talking about current North American standards of beauty, but that is arguably kind of what this Athena sort of profile, that is what codominant gives us. Now, audience, I want us to be mindful. Codominant tends to also be one of our more tricky profiles. Why is that? That is because I said because the body is happy to make and go down both pathways, it's also very sensitive to the environment. And sometimes I'll see, based on environmental input, these profiles going one way or the other. Oftentimes, environmental profile, really what I'm talking about is your ability to detox, right? Both these estrogen and androgen are cleaned up through different pathways. So if a person isn't optimal in cleaning up one of those pathways, they may slant the other way. Okay, so what does a male look like who sits on this more co-dominant side of things, right? They tend to be that guy that is able to put on all the muscle, right? They really love their androgens, and androgens help them, go to the gym, look at a weight, and the body's like, cool, we got it. But they're also the profile that can arguably put on a little bit more weight as well. You know, those guys at the gym, they're buff for days, but then they have a little bit of that proverbial beer gut. That tends to be a bit of that figure there because the estrogen shifts some of that metabolism a little bit. Vanny or Jen, can you please bring down the screen a little bit so we're looking at the second page? Beautiful. Thank you. So we're going to focus now on, if you want to scroll down a little bit, so we're looking at cystic acne, hair loss, and hirsutism. Gorgeous. Just up a little bit. Perfect. Awesome. Thank you. So remember how in the last profiles I said, estrogen profiles are a little bit protected for stuff like this. Not so much when we see the androgen side creeping in. Okay. So what can androgens influence, especially excess? And remember, audience, there's a lot of things that feed into this, but in general, excessive androgens can encourage hair loss in both men and women, can encourage hirsutism in women. Remember, that's the facial hair, that's a little bit of hair loss and kind of those things that you wouldn't necessarily expect to see in women. And then lastly, cellulite. That's not because of our androgens. That is because of our estrogen. So even though, sometimes they describe this as the perfect profile, it's also runs a risk, if you will, of experiencing the negative side, right? Because you're producing all the more hormone. There's a little bit more risk that things can go awry. All right. So that's what I wanted to focus on there. Also the cystic acne, I apologize if we scroll up just a little bit. Cystic acne is something that can come from excess. There's many causes, but it can come from excessive androgens. So this tends to be also one of those profiles that we can see some of that cystic acne, either on the face, on the back, on the chest, and sometimes also on like buttocks, hip, and thighs. All right. Okay, audience. Now we have to guess, is this male or female? Audience, do we have any guesses here as to male or female? Um, I'm gonna go with, since the last was a female, this might be male. Why not? Why not? All right. I'm seeing Barbara's agreeing with me, and that's good enough. Barbara, we're going through guests, and you were right. I love it. Okay. So we already know that the first square there is our most beloved Justin. So we know we're looking at the last two squares here. Um, the last square is someone, they could be codominant because they're a little bit, they're in that teenage years. I'm gonna guess the last one. Am I right? Nope. All right. The middle one, process of elimination. The middle square. Am I right, Jan or Vanny? I'm gonna guess that I'm right. Okay. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Yeah. So Rick. All right, guys. So Rick is the DNA company's chief financial officer. He's our happy little number cruncher, a position I am very grateful I'm not in. So he tracks all our dollar bills and all those other numbers that are important to business folk. And he is a co-dominant profile, right? So again, what does this mean for a male? This male is able to look at weights and put on muscle mass. They are able to put that on very quickly and easily because the androgens support that. For the men of the world, a little bit more risk towards hair loss, which we're seeing slightly here, balanced out though happily by estrogen. Thankfully, estrogen tends to be that hair giver. You're going to get a lot more thickness with the hair there. So there's an element of it being balanced in Rick. And then also there is a little bit of a softness again based on that estrogen. So I think Rick wonderfully fits this co-dominant picture. So Rick, thank you for generously donating to the Stump Krista and make her stumble around and not know what she's talking about game. I love it. Reality TV family. Here we go. Okay, guys, let's jump into our next profile. Vanny or Jen, if you want to bring up profile number 4. All right. Oh, look at us. Look at us. It's another co-dominant profile audience. So already off the top, I'm going to guess this is going to be a female. But again, let's go through that co-dominant profile because I said this is one of the more tricky profiles and I want to be honest about that. The co-dominant profiles I find really difficult to predict when it comes to body morphology. I also find really difficult to predict as to, are they going to be a true co-dominant, or would something within their environment shift them one way or the other, right? One way more towards estrogen, the other way being more towards androgen. So again, let's talk about, if you're a co-dominant profile, what exactly this is going to look like, right? For men, they're going to be really able to put on that muscle mass, but there's going to be a little bit of softness to it, a little bit more difficulty getting that leanness that many men seek within the Western world because of the estrogen's influence on metabolism and, a little bit slight preference towards energy saving, towards fat, right? For the woman, again, they're going to have the estrogen going to afford them the curves, and the androgen is going to afford them the leanness and the ability to put on some muscle mass. The risk, though, audience, of all of this, again, is if you're not cleaning up those hormones properly, you run a risk of seeing kind of the bad side of each of them. So on the androgen side of things, this could be risk of cystic acne. This could be risk of hirsutism, the excessive hair growth or hair loss, right? And For women, again, for that the estrogen side, cellulite, as well as just putting on a little bit more weight. Okay. Um, so, audience, let's check out who this is. I'm going to guess it's a female because our last co-dominant was also a female. And audience, I'm just going to remind you, if you have any questions, please do put them in the question and answer box because they tend to get lost in the chat. All right. So it is a female. Um, my guess, by way of the hack that thankfully we've eliminated all the other options, is going to be the middle one with the horse. So I believe that is our most wonderful Allison Henry. Am I right? Oh, here we go. Here we go. So this is everyone, this is Allison. Allison Henry is our Chief Operating Officer. And she absolutely espouses all the beautiful that is a co-dominant profile in a woman. There is, and excuse me, Allison, about talking to you this way. There is the curves with the leanness, right? There's the curves with that ability to put on muscle mass, and I know in particular the muscle mass we've been seeing grow because she's been hitting the gym, and so this is one of those fun profiles where you get to play along with it. Hormones are going to happily lend you any which way that you want. It depends on how you are exercising, leveraging lifestyle to really shift the hormone profile in a way that you want. So, Allison, it is perfect. Okay. Vanny and Vanny and Jen, could you toss up the next profile for me, please? Audience, I hope you're following along. Oh, it's another co-dominant profile. Okay. We'll talk about different risk factors. Audience, I hope you're following along. Audience, I hope that either within your patient portal or within your app, you also are looking at your hormone profile. You will find that by way of looking into the hormone section and then the system summary, and you'll be able to see your own profile. Okay. So this next person that we're looking at is another co-dominant, okay? And let's talk a little bit around some of the risks that can come with a co-dominant profile. For the males, co-dominant profile can run a bit of a risk towards prostate enlargement, right? And then in females, this can run a bit of a risk towards PCOS. And those are both because of the higher androgens. On the flip of that, namely on the estrogen side of things, right? We know for men that that can also increase the risk of gynecomastia, right? That male breast. And for women, that can also increase the risk of endometriosis. None of these profiles are deterministic insofar if you have one of these profiles, it doesn't mean you're going to be getting any one of those conditions. It just slightly increases risk because you have access to that excessive hormone, right? Excuse me, that excessive hormone that can then predispose towards some of the those tendencies. Okay, so Jen and Fanny, if you could bring up who I am guessing from for this next co-dominant profile. All right. Process of elimination. The lady with the dog, I think. Jessica, is that true? Oh, it is. Wonderful, wonderful. So it is Jessica. So, guys, what I want to actually focus on this photo, because we haven't focused on it much yet, is that co-dominant profiles or estrogen dominant profiles lend to beautiful, thick, luscious hair, especially for women. Okay. If you're favoring that estrogen side or in that codominant side, the extra estrogen there really encourages beautiful hair growth, right? And so we are definitely seeing that in Jessica's profile. I haven't met her in person, so I can't really take a guess as to body, but I would imagine she, based on how well she takes care of herself, I imagine she has similar physical characteristics as I mentioned for Allison. So the curvy but lean. All right, audience, we're going to get into this last profile. And as you may have already guessed, there's an element, it was based on people who volunteered wanting to stump me. I think we'll make sure that the people who got stumped get a prize. And so I will be, after this last profile that we're looking at, any of the other profiles that we haven't talked about, I'll briefly talk about those as well so that you also know the characteristics behind your profile. So, Vanny Jen, do you want to bring up the last profile for us? Amazing. Oh, perfect. This lends nicely. Androgen dominant audience. All right. And I think I've seen that a little bit in the chat. So let's get to talk through this. So, androgen dominant, like as we talked about with estrogen dominant, means your body's more inclined to be producing your androgens. You're going to be more leveraging that 5 alpha reductase side of things. Okay. Dominant meaning you're happy to make a lot of those hormones. Okay. So, what do these profiles look like? I'm going to start again with men, or maybe for the first time with men. I think usually we've done women first. If you're a male with this profile, the person I want you to think about is someone like The Rock. Okay. Now, I would imagine there's a lot of other variables that go into his physique, but he is kind of that typical androgen dominant profile. Why is that? Someone who has incredible muscle mass, byproduct of him working out. Let's not pretend like this is purely genetics. He works out, but it's that complement of genetics and actually working out. So there's an incredible ease to gaining that muscle mass because of that increased androgen. But the trip of that is the hair loss, right? People who are androgen dominant typically tend to lose hair, have that male pattern baldness, okay? Because there's a little bit more androgen, creeping around. These profiles also tend to sit a little bit more lean. So for the guys who aren't necessarily hitting the gym, they will sit a little bit more on that lean side. They'll still look a little bit more muscular, but they'll be very lean because of that androgen contribution to metabolism. They are going to be more of your hairy guys as well, and this will lend to women as well, but they'll tend to have the thicker beards, some more of that chest hair, body hair. There's a lot of other influences to that, in particular, your ethnicity, but this is one thing that, especially when ethnicity meets this profile, really lends to that. Okay. They're also going to be at a bit more risk for things like cystic acne. Okay. On the female side of things, right? This female, I want you to think a little bit around, oh, my brain is failing me because it's been a long day, but who is the American gymnast that has won all the things? Simone Biles. I want you to think of that as kind of a typical estrogen dominant, or sorry, androgen dominant profile, right? A woman who has a little bit more shoulder and upper body strength, a little bit more narrow through the hips, and again, very lean, has a lot of that muscle on them. Okay. Very strong. These tend to be a lot of athletic profiles. And for the women who are listening who still have periods and are an androgen dominant, when you couple intense exercise with this profile, yes, you're going to see better muscle returns, but you're also at a bit more risk for amenorrhea or losing your period because of that. So, something to be mindful for our female athletes out there who have this profile, much more naturally inclined, but it will disrupt menses. And so, that should be something you should be aware of. Okay. So for the females, kind of that Simone Biles. In the flip of that, especially if you're not exercising, these women again will be a bit more top heavy, but they are really at risk for some of that central adiposity and a little bit more of a plump, especially around the midsection presentation. There'll be greater risk of hirsutism and cystic acne. Again, hirsutism being some of that hair loss, that my words aren't working, the facial hair growth. Okay. And a little bit more risk towards PCOS or kind of more those androgen noted conditions. Okay. So audience, why don't we check out who this is? Jen, Vanny, can you toss up my androgen dominant folk? And from the wonderful process of elimination, audience, who wants to guess? I think it's the last picture, the guy crossing his arms. Weston, there we go. So, what we're going to see in Weston's profile, and actually, you can't really see it from this angle, but audience, do you see that very pronounced jawline? And you can't see it well, but I promise it exists a little bit of that pronounced Adam's apple again, androgen dominant profiles in particular in men, they tend to espouse some more of those typical, right? Typical male characteristics. So for men, that's going to be that muscle mass. It's going to be that more lean figure. It's going to be Adam's apple. It's going to be some of the facial hair that we definitely see in Weston and a more noticeable jaw. Okay. All right. So, audience, I think the only profile that we did not go through would be the balanced profile and then the androgen balanced profile. For the androgen balanced profile, very similar to the androgen dominant, just not as extreme, right? So for men, they'll still be able to put on that muscle mass, but they're not necessarily going to get to that rock size, right? They're going to stand a little more lean. They may not lose the hair in the same way, but still definitely at risk for that. Okay. And then still, again, risk for some of the cystic acne and things like that, but especially when they're kind of on things that encourage testosterone. On the woman side of things, much more a lean appearance. Again, they're the people when lifestyle meets it properly, they will be that very lean women. But when lifestyle isn't supportive, they kind of slip a little bit more into that central adiposity space. They tend to be a bit broader shoulders and then a little bit more of the central adiposity. Okay. The balanced profile, okay, that is, think of that kind of as a complement to co-dominant, just less so, right? Kind of think about it like co-balanced, if you will. Just co-balanced doesn't sound as interesting. So they're happy to be making both their androgens and estrogens. They're just going to be doing it just enough. And so they like the co-dominant profile, kind of best of both worlds, but not as magnified, not as announced as our co-dominant profiles. So, audience, I hope that was helpful and I hope that was fun because I know my back office delighted in trying to trip me up. Um, I am going to now start running into the questions and answers. So, audience, if you have your profile before you, if you have a question specific to your profile that you want me to be answering, feel free to toss it into the chat. The one thing I am going to disclaim everything with is there are so many other genes that inform the way we look that there's never going to be a 100% science behind it. There's so many things that inform it, but this is kind of a quick and fun way in order to understand what's up. So let me jump into the Q&A here. The first question I have coming is from Susan. Susan asked, is co-dominant the same as balanced? So just as I mentioned now, right, Susan, they're somewhat the same. The difference is how strong and ferocious your body's going to be creating those sex hormones, right? Our balanced profiles, they tend to be making just enough, right, to have those sex features, whereas some of the dominant profiles, they're making enough and then some. So they're going to be much more of that pronounced figure. But again, remember, that's not always going to be as obvious, right? We saw Dr. Steady, who is a dominant profile, but very much that more petite but curvy frame. Okay. The next question I have here is, I think from Madeline. Audience, I need to get new glasses. We can all struggle together. It's going to be great. So Madeline is saying, what if due to your age you no longer produce any estrogen? What would your DNA profile show? So Madeline, your DNA does not change, right? The enzymes that your DNA creates or the information that your DNA offers the body does not change. What might change based on your age, as you know, especially once you hit peri and then menopause, is going to be how much hormone you have access to, right? And so we know that while your profile isn't going to change, the way your body is experiencing your hormones is going to change. If you're dropping that estrogen, I find the biggest thing that these profiles can tell us, especially for people who hit that menopausal point, is almost how dramatic menopause is going to be. For females with a dominant profile, so that could be estrogen dominant, androgen dominant, or co-dominant, they tend to have a bit more of a tumultuous peri and menopause experience because they were creating a lot of hormone and now they're creating not a lot. Whereas compared to the balanced profiles, they were creating some and the drop is not as marked. So that tends to be one thing we can learn from these profiles. And you'll still keep the same figure, right? Your bone structure, the width of hips and shoulders, et cetera, isn't going to change. But where you store your fat absolutely will, because you may not have access to that estrogen. And so a lot of times when we hit menopause, we see a bit more of a belly in women because that's the body trying to create more estrogen, right? Belly fat is not lazy fat. It's fat that actually creates a lot of estrogen. So that's what that belly is doing for you. So it's almost like your genes don't change, but your weight distribution will based on what access to hormones you do have. So I hope that's helpful for you, Madeline. Um, Yeah, so Madeline's also asking a question, what body shape, or how would your genes determine what body shape in terms of fat accumulation? So kind of pear versus apple. So for our pears, they tend to be more the estrogen dominant, sometimes the co-dominant, right? Um, and then our apples tend to be our androgen dominant, as well as our androgen balanced, and sometimes the co dominant. Remember how I talked about co-dominant is really responsive to the environment, and so typically we'd kind of expect a little bit more of that curvature in them, right? That proverbial Coke bottle moment. But based on some environmental outputs, it can sometimes present a little bit more like an apple figure. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. Oh, and Madeline, I'm seeing some people are saying they love your questions, so thank you for sharing them. Um, Let's see. John has asked the next question. What about androgen balanced individuals? So, John, I hope that my explanation for that did go through. So, they're like androgen dominant, right? Really happy to put on that lean muscle mass, a little bit higher metabolism, but not as pronounced, right? Again, they have access to that hormone, but not in the excessive way. So, they'll be able to put on muscle mass, keep lean and whatnot, but not in the exaggerated way compared to the dominant profiles. Um, so John is also asking, is there a better or worse hormone profile for benefits of fasting? Wonderful question. I'm going to answer this for people who do not have a period. So that either means males or that means postmenopausal females, because having menses really influences the questions of fasting. So in terms of this, I would say arguably androgen profiles are going to be more favored towards some of the fasting in particular, because they can at times be a little more insulin sensitive. Okay. So they tend to adapt well to that, especially for some of the insulin supports there. Estrogen profiles will absolutely also respond to this because their metabolism tends to be a little bit lower. And we know that sometimes fasting can shake things up a little bit, right? As long as it's not that chronic kind of yo yo dieting fasting, we're talking about true fasting protocols. But I would say the more robust and happy to take to it profile would be the androgen ones, whereas estrogen will absolutely benefit from it, especially in terms of insulin regulation. Um, right? In terms of insulin regulation, but and support of the metabolism. Okay. For those with periods, right? I would offer first half of your cycle. It's a little more pointed by estrogen. It can absolutely support some of that fasting, but I would never suggest in the second half of your cycle, right? So that's from ovulation to point of bleed that there be any or intensive fasting because that's when progesterone is most there, and that does not take well to fasting. Okay, every body is different, every female is different, but by and large, for those with periods, that tends to be the quick and dirty rule. All right. The next question uh, so is would a co-dominant profile notice a stronger body odor when shifting towards androgen? Yeah, so um, body odor is there's a lot of elements to it. So for example, one of it is actually genetic driven within a lot of Asian diaspora populations. They don't actually have a gene that will encourage some body odor. That said, right, body odor is a byproduct of sebum coming out, bacteria munching on it, and then the smell that that bacteria puts out. And so, androgen, as well as codominant profiles, they can really encourage some of that because they will encourage some of that sebum, which is what that bacteria is going to be munching on to create the odor. So, someone sitting more on the androgen side, so androgen dominant, maybe androgen balanced, as well as codominant, or any teenager, just based on the symphony and the crazy of hormones that's going on there, they can be a little bit more subject to body odor. But again, there's elements of other genetic components as well as rigor of hygiene, right? All right. So I think that was Darlene. I hope that answered your question, Darlene. The next question I have um, is how prevalent is codominant? Strange that so many DNA folk are codominant. Um, you know what? That's a beautiful question, Lisa. I don't actually have statistics on that. Um, but I really like that question. The statistician in me is very happy about that. I'm going to look into that. I do not have an answer to that one. Um, yeah, interesting. I don't know. I think what's interesting to me, dominant profiles, um, estrogen and androgen are both really, really important to different elements of ambition. Androgen really gives you that aggression, that get out there, go do it. Estrogen affords you energy and focus. So I wonder, question mark, if the reason DNA Co has a lot of codominant profiles is because that's kind of really capitalizing on both of those hormones, right? The androgen to have the energy and the ambition and the aggression, and then the estrogen to have the focus and the stamina of it all. That is, Lisa, girl, high five. I might send you something. We might send you a surprise. Lisa, toss your name into the chat. We're going to send you a surprise for giving me a fun question. Thank you very much. Um, let's see. The next question I have here is from George, I think. Um, I wonder if there's a correlation with long, thin bodies having narrow arteries and wider, stalker bodies having wider arteries. Um, to my awareness, George, there's not a correlation between artery size and body size outside of obviously those with bigger frames are going to have bigger space for heart and kind of that. Like there's a proportionality to it, but I don't think it's going to be in the way that you just referred to it. I'm not sure though. I haven't never done a literature dive on that one. All right, Kimberly. Um, they're saying when presenting estrogen dominant physically, but co-dominant in symptoms, which gene variant would be at play? So, Kimberly, what I would encourage um, you to do is, so it sounds like, audience, we talked about that the co-dominant profile is really subject to the environment, right? Especially detox. What things are going to be going into body, right? To be encouraging. So that can be endocrine disruptors, that can be other things like fasting, that can be exercise. Different things will encourage, as well as the lack clearance or lack thereof can really encourage one profile or the other. So, Kimberly, if you're saying that you're a codominant profile, but you're presenting in an estrogen dominant way, I'd encourage you to touch base with one of our clinicians to really dive in what is putting you more in that estrogen side of things. And is that problematic? Maybe it's not. That I think that's a good question. Is that problematic? Do you not want to be in the estrogen dominant space? And then what can we do about that, right? Especially if it's medically problematic. So I'd encourage you to reach out to us because hormones is such a nuanced one. There's a lot of testing that we want to do. There's a lot more questions that we'd want to ask. All right, Lisa has another question for Simone Biles. How do we know if it's due to her genes or because of her musculature development pre-puberty? Competitive dancer. Because okay, got it. So the question that they're asking, so I use Simone Biles as an example for someone who had kind of that androgen dominant female physique, right? So it's a little bit more muscular, strong. You're seeing a bit of more top heavy, meaning strong shoulders, and then much more narrow hips, right? Narrow legs, kind of like that inverted triangle, with a risk of, for those that aren't as active or maybe don't take care of themselves in a certain way, a bit more of a risk towards an apple profile, right? A bit more top heavy, central heavy, and then not as heavy on the legs. And so Lisa is asking the question, do we know if Simone Biles' figure, we're using her as a generality. I know absolutely nothing about her. We're just kind of using her as a thought figure. Do we know if it's because of all the work she put in pre-puberty, all her gymnastics work, or is it because of her profile? And we don't, right? I would, my guess would be it's probably a combination of both. There was a study done a while ago in the gymnastics world, and there was almost a self-selection of athletes in that had either an androgen balanced or androgen dominant esque profile, and they almost self selected in. So I say that Simone Biles with a little bit of education as to typically what can happen, but absolutely no awareness of her. Um, but I think so. There's an interesting element of genes sometimes push us towards liking certain things more because we're good at them. But it is a wonderful question of, is it because of puberty? Is it because of genes? And I would say it's probably because a whole host of many different things. There's a lot of genes that influence sex steroid as well as other body figure sorts and propensity towards exercise, etc. So it is a happy little symphony of all the above. I wish I had a more specific answer for you, Lisa, but that's where the cards have fallen. The next question that we have here is from SM, and they're asking, should an estrogen dominant woman shy away from HRT, estrogen, progesterone? Yeah. So a few comments, SM. The first comment is, I made comment that for women who have, or females who have a dominant profile, so that's estrogen dominant, androgen dominant, or codominant, going into perimenopause and menopause, the fall from a lot of hormone to minimal hormone is quite dramatic, especially if you compare it to balance. So it's going to be kind of like that halfway fall. So I would say the dominant profiles actually tend to really have an affinity for BHRT over the less ones because it's compensating for a bigger a fall, a bigger gap, right? That said, that sort of decision is so incredibly personalized to you, your provider, and your health history. If you want support making that decision, do not hesitate to reach out to us. Okay. You want to contact us at CEO at thednacompany.com, and we can set you up with a provider who understands your profile and understands the BHRT needs, and that can be supportive. So I find, again, dominant profiles tend to enjoy and like it more because of that cushion that it gives, but there's so many other variables that need to be considered. Okay. All right. I'm going to grab a sip of water, but the next question we have is from Marjorie. Marjorie is asking, how do they download the DNA 360 report? How do you download the app? Marjorie, in the chat, we're also going to put in link to get the app. And then if you can also log into our patient portal, which will have reports that look very similar to what we just saw this evening, what we explored. And I'll have the team put that link to the portal as well in there. Okay. The next question I have is from Carmela, I think. They are saying that they have an estrogen balance profile, but increased likelihood of estrogen toxicity. What does that mean? Thank you, Carmela. We have not gotten into that. So estrogen toxicity doesn't necessarily influence body morphology, right? So it's not really going to per se influence, are you that apple or that pear, hips, breasts, that sort of thing. Instead, what it's going to be influencing is, as you break down your estrogens, what are those metabolites that you're breaking down? By and large, we're making roughly three: a 2-hydroxy, a, um, a 4-hydroxy, and a 16-hydroxy. And when you see an estrogen toxicity risk, it means you're someone who's predisposed to be making a greater amount of either the 4-hydroxy or the 16-hydroxy. The 16-hydroxy tends to be something that's a little more proliferative, meaning if you unfortunately have, a seeding of some estrogen sensitive cancers, it tends to encourage that growth, that estrogen growth tissue. And then for the 4-hydroxy, it tends to be a bit more inflammatory. So the toxicity speaks to, it creates a bit more inflammation as well as proliferation of these cells. Okay. Doesn't really have an impact per se on physical presentation to my awareness. Maybe research has developed in the last year or two, but last time I did a literature dive, it did not have that influence, but more on that experience of hormones and elimination of hormones. Okay. Um, Sheila Shelley is asking, what can men do about man boobs? So this is the gynecomastia that we talked about. A few different answers here. Oftentimes, gynecomastia will develop in adolescence. And if it does, by and large, unless there's marked obesity in that adolescent during that period, we'll assume a lean figure. We'll assume that this is just a development. Unfortunately, surgery tends to be one of the more helpful things here. Okay. I would say definitely keeping weight down is helpful, but if you've someone that has already sprouted some of that tissue, surgery is really going to be the only way to eliminate it, unless again you're overweight, and then that weight loss will help reduce the size of that. Now, if you're someone that has sprouted some of this after puberty, okay, that can be reflective of a few different things. I would really encourage, if you sprout this after puberty, go talk to your doctor because it can be an endocrine disorder, right? This will also be really reflective of an increase of weight gain, or a loss of testosterone. Any which way, I'd really encourage, especially if there's that sprouting after puberty, to go talk to your doctor because you want to understand why that's happening. Okay. The next question, I believe, is from Nia, or Naya. I don't know how to say that one. What contributes to estrogen recycling? What are the signs of estrogen recycling? How can we prevent this? Um, so estrogen recycling, what I imagine you're getting at is when the body goes through the effort of getting rid of your estrogens, it kind of dumps them in your large colon, right? It goes through a big metabolism process, breaks it down into some of those 4, 2, and 16 metabolites. And then you're going to be doing some methylation on top of that, and that helps get it ready. And you're supposed to be dumping that into your bile, or sorry, into your large intestine for removal. If that bowel is sitting there, right, you can actually reabsorb some of that, and so that kind of contributes to a little bit of that estrogen recycling that you're talking about. I interestingly see in a lot of plant-based people and plant-based females in particular, sometimes a lacking of estrogen simply because they're not getting access to some of that recycling, and the fiber is scooping things out quicker. So depends again what's going on in your health history, whether that's a good thing for you, beneficial or not so good. We want to ensure that estrogen clearance, that estrogen removal, but we don't want to be doing it excessively, in particular in those menstruating years or afterwards. So I'd encourage that to talk to someone just to get an assessment of where's your estrogen at, are the levels good, and how can you better be supporting that estrogen, because it's so very important to females across every moment of their life, including those postmenopausally. All right. Would love to know the answer. Oh, yeah. Okay. Awesome. Lisa's a fellow nerd. So Lisa, when I get some of those statistics, I'll let you know. Okay. The next question I have, I believe, is from George. Um, George is asking, does getting liposuction of abdominal fat affect hormone adjustments made in the body in menopause in a negative or a positive way? So George, I'm going to offer a bit of a speculative answer because I need to be honest, I've never actually looked at how liposuction impacts a body postmenopausally. So this is going to be speculative, but when you're removing that abdominal fat, it is a abdominal fat is metabolically active. I talked about abdominal fat will produce absolutely some of the estrogens. It also produces some other inflammatory markers, right? We know that if you're carrying an excessive amount of central weight, it is an increased risk towards cardiovascular illness, metabolic illness, and all-cause mortality. So it's not a good thing. So removing it arguably is positive. That said, you're not doing that through exercise and you're not doing that through diet adjustment. So the things that got you to the point of putting it on haven't changed, nor have they changed to the betterment of your health. If you're putting it on, really it's evidence that body isn't in a good state. So will it help some of those health outcomes that I just mentioned? So cardiovascular, thinking stroke and heart attack, metabolic, thinking diabetes. I forget what the last one was that I said. It's been a long day, audience, but whatever it is, I would really encourage that. Sometimes it's helpful and it's a good kickstart for some people to get to have that removed. Um, but I would really encourage, parallel to that, doing the diet and lifestyle things, because this will just come back. And this is very much reflective of the diet and lifestyle that got you to that point. But again, it's not to say you shouldn't, it's not to shame those that have. Sometimes for some people, that is the perfect kickstart into that shift, right? So I hope that answered your question as to health outcomes and taking that out. Um, all right. The next question I have is from Margaret. I've been told that visceral fat is at 0.5%. Does that mean I no longer have fatty liver? Um, Margaret, fatty liver, there's many things that can cause fatty liver. It isn't always going to be read through central adiposity. I don't know if you've ever heard the term of skinny fat. It tends to be people who look super lean, but have a lot of fat within organs, etc., including the liver. So I would never use those as a correlate. Okay. I would really offer you kind of have to do some further workup to understand where your liver is at. Sometimes that's imaging, sometimes that's blood work. So I'd really encourage you to be working with a provider. And if you want support on that, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Okay. The last question I have is from Sheila. Are codominant profile women candidates for HRT? Absolutely. Again, I said kind of those dominant profiles really tend to favor it a bit more than other profiles, but that is always, always a decision between you and your doctor because there's many more variables than just your profile. So I'd encourage you to talk to your doctor because I think we talked a little bit around estrogen toxicity, and that will really play into not necessarily should you or shouldn't you, but how you go about monitoring and adjusting. Okay. Audience, I think we made it. I hope everyone here really, really, really enjoyed this webinar. For me, it was a lot of fun because I think we're talking about things that we haven't always talked about within our webinars, namely how hormones can, or a gene profile can lend to my crystal ball seeing of you or not seeing of you, right? I think there's a few interesting moments, especially Justin was an interesting moment, right? The entire audience did not think he would be estrogen dominant, and there he was. Right. So, audience, I really hope this enlightened. I hope it got you into your hormone profile, got you thinking about your own body, how you do or do not fit to that. Remember, like, for example, Justin's that beautiful example of he's an estrogen dominant profile, but through work and discipline in the gym, he does not appear that way. He was a happy surprise to everyone. So, audience, I'd really encourage you. This is not deterministic, but it definitely does set the stage and it tells you how hard you're going to have to work if you want to change something. So, I hope you all enjoyed yourself. If this was a good webinar, please do let us know. Please let us know if you want us to be tossing it up more often.